Welcome back to the Power Suite podcast. My name is Chris Van Dyne. We are here for week 3 of college football, and we're really excited. We've got our college totals game of the month coming this weekend, kicking it off for our first big play of the year. We've got a special guest handicapper that's going to join me in a moment, and it's going to be exciting. Then we got Jim and Robbie, as usual, to come in and give us some picks for this week's college football slate. But first, we haven't had a guest handicapper this year. We had a little FCS talk last week, and I want to thank Stu Labanowitz again for coming on and talking about that Montana State, South Dakota State game, which turned out to be just as advertised, came down to pretty much the last play of the game. And then also letting the listeners know that he thought Southern Illinois would beat Northern Illinois, and they did. So I hope some customers were able to put some scratch on that. But we're going to welcome in Colby Dant, who's been on the podcast before. Thank you for joining us, Colby. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, and I appreciate you doing the FCS and having mutual friend Stone Labanowitz on the show, man.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun. I got to go on his podcast earlier, the FCS Nation Radio. I did that earlier this year. We've put a lot more time into the FCS. We've done really well with what we call our small college plays, which are really FCS plays in the last couple of years. And, there's a lot of value in that FCS market. And I'm sure our customers were happy with us last week. If you had our two star-rated FCS plays, Campbell and Gardner-Webb both covered. And Campbell, it was an absolute blowout, 56-7. And I know some of the customers have said they're having trouble finding those lines. Just so everyone knows, a lot of those lines don't pop up until a couple hours before the game starts. I got Campbell on DraftKings. We put it out at +2 because we didn't really know what the line was going to be. We were going off some offshore stuff. Ended up coming out at -7. I still played it. I still felt strong about it, and won easily. Colby, you do a lot of great work with the college football experience, part of the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. I want to thank you again for being here. How do you feel about this college football season so far? What have you noticed?
I mean, it seems to be parity happening more and more. And, I know some people are asking the question if we think that is NIL based or the transfer portal based, but obviously seeing Texas go into Tuscaloosa and win the way that they did. Also seeing just the Pac-12 come up out of the blue. And look, the Pac-12 does start. I think every single team in the conference starts a transfer quarterback. Maybe not Stanford, but every other team. I think you go one by one. And you're like, maybe there is some truth to this transfer portal thing where you go out and get the quarterbacks and we've got parity because the talent spreads out. Perhaps, because I feel like the past couple of years you've kind of seen. Now Georgia did run through everybody, but obviously TCU getting to the national championship was quite the story.
Yeah, and we'll talk about one of those teams that really used the portal here in a few minutes. But I think to expand on your thoughts, it has allowed coaches who are willing to use it the ability to adapt their rosters faster, not have to go through when coaches take over at programs that are struggling, that year zero where they know that they have an underdeveloped roster and they're going to take their lumps. You're not going to see that as much if these coaches use the portal because they can bring talent in right away.
Yeah, and how important is it now to have that, general manager? Because you look at some of the most influential transfers, whether it's Shedeur Sanders or take a guy like Jared Verse last year with Florida State, coming from Albany and Jackson State. I mean, there's just Cam Ward, Incarnate Word. So, you got to have a team of people studying the FCS, the FBS, even D2 for a little bit.
Western Kentucky.
Yeah, exactly. Austin Reed is a perfect example. So, your scouting department, I think more than ever needs, and another thing is when you have the Power 5 schools, your elites, your Alabamas, your Ohio State's, and your, whatever brand you want to use, is if you're not going to start them, guess what? I'm going to transfer. So they might end up playing a team that, maybe can better utilize them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get into a few of the games that we wanted to talk about this week. We're going to start off with a rivalry game. The Backyard Brawl is back. I don't know if you know this. I'm originally from the Pittsburgh area, born in Pittsburgh area, but grew up about a half hour away from Pittsburgh, crossed the river in Ohio. Pitt -1. The total is 50. Panthers did not look good last week, lost as a favorite against Cincinnati on a bounce back. Who do you think wins the Backyard Brawl, and do you see any value in this game?
So you grew up probably where Bob Huggins thought he was. You
he, he thought he was somewhere.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I'm glad that this rivalry's back. I've actually been to Morgantown for this game back in the early 2000s. Awesome environment to me. Like whether you're in Pittsburgh last year, we saw it opening season, or in Morgantown, which hasn't happened in a long time, too long. This place is going to be bonkers, man. And you got Neil Brown coaching for his job. And speaking of the Bob Huggins thing, I almost think that relieves a little pressure from Neil Brown, because they're going to have to hire a basketball coach, brand new athletic director. So I don't know that he's on the hot seat as much as everyone else thinks he is, because they got the work cut out for him from an athletic department. But if he wins this game, I think he might be safe. I think he might be safe if he wins this game. You look at last year, I felt like WVU probably should have won the game. And I'll be honest, I think WVU is probably a little bit better than what everyone was labeling them. I know they didn't cover against Penn State, but Penn State got that late touchdown to blow that cover. But I actually thought they showed out pretty decently in that Penn State game, and then hard to get a read on the Duquesne game. But I kind of think they're better than what people think. They return all 5 offensive linemen from a year ago. Garrett Green's always a little shaky passing the ball, but I like his athleticism. And Phil Jurkovic, I was high on him as a quarterback at Boston College, but I don't know if it's the Narduzzi thing, but what did he go, 10 of 32?
Yeah.
Against Cincinnati? Those
so
are a little
5
bit
sacks too.
Yeah, 5 sacks, holds on to the ball a little bit too. That's been a story because he's gotten injured so many times over the years. I actually think I lean West Virginia here. Just the energy at home, Neil Brown coaching, maybe can salvage his job. And I've been more impressed with West Virginia in their 2 games than I have Pitt. I know you're probably a Pitt guy, but I just feel like W hosting this game, and this game hasn't happened forever. So I just feel like the energy in this place, much like we saw Pitt kind of steal the win last year, I think West Virginia might be in a spot to do that this year here in Morgantown.
Yeah, Pitt's been disappointing so far. Really the only real game we saw them play was last week against Cincinnati, but 262 yards against a revamped Cincinnati team that lost a lot from last year. New coaching staff. I expected them to perform better. They have been notorious for not playing well when they're favored. The Narduzzi's teams do better when they're an underdog, and they are favored here. He has had success as an away favorite, more so. He struggles as a home favorite. Giving up 216 rushing yards last week was concerning, because that's not your typical Pitt defense. Last year, they only had 1 game where they gave up more than 200 rushing yards. That was against Georgia Tech. They only gave up 98 rushing yards a game last year. The year before, no one rushed for 200 yards a game on them. They only gave up 89 rushing yards a game. And you keep going back, and you see the same story, around 100, less than 100 rushing yards a game for them. And I agree with you on Jurkovic. And he didn't make any friends in Pittsburgh by complaining about the fans booing. I don't know if you saw that. That didn't go over well. I got a lot of friends that are like, hey, you're the one playing poorly. Don't be mad at us. We're just expressing our frustration.
Yeah. And one of the things that, you kind of touched on this that stood out to me watching that Cincinnati game was I felt like Cincinnati won the line of scrimmage, which was shocking to me because I thought that was a clear area of weakness for the Bearcats coming into the season this year. And watching and seeing what they did against them, and Pitt has been a factory for defensive linemen going to the NFL, even pre-Narduzzi. So I was a bit taken back by that. And one thing that stands out to me is I do think West Virginia's got one of the better offensive lines in the Big 12. That makes me believe that they're going to be able to dictate the line of scrimmage yet again against Pitt. And then, I understand West Virginia's defense was an area of weakness a year ago. I think they got a little bit better. At that Penn State game, I know they still lost by 20 points or so, but I was actually somewhat impressed with what they did there on the road in a whiteout, and knowing that, Cincinnati had lost so many players to the portal. I was just surprised. 10 of 32. I expected Jerkovic reuniting with Signetti at the offensive coordinator spot. I thought they'd be a little more fine tuned. So now you got to go on the road with that. I like W's chances.
Any thoughts on the total at 50?
I think I would probably lean under. You look at last year, they had Graham Harrell and JT Daniels, and they had some success in the air. I felt like they couldn't run the ball last year against Pitt, but they were having success in the air. Another thing is, I think West Virginia's defense, despite all the transfer additions, they went out and got a lot of FCS guys. We were just talking about that. Yeah. I think this defense is probably a little bit better than a year ago. And having Jerkovic look very inconsistent and uncomfortable, I would say, in week one, leads me to believe that we're probably not going to have the most amount of scoring in this game. So give me the under.
Yeah, I agree with that. We had the game as a toss-up and power sweep. We had Pitt -3 as our line. Probably a game we're going to stay away from at the end of the week. But it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And total's interesting. That under is interesting. Let's move on. It's something we haven't really talked about on the podcast yet. Me, Jim, and Robbie haven't used Colorado in any of our plays yet. We're kind of waiting to see what they look like. But I know wanted to talk to you about one of your favorite totals, and it involves Colorado. And what are your thoughts on the Buffaloes and how they've played so far? And where are you going as far as this total goes with Colorado and Colorado State?
Well, Colorado's been a cash cow for me because I was on the money line against TCU. I just thought
that was a nice call, by the way. Nice call.
I just thought beginning of the year. I still worry about the depth middle of the year. Like if you start to get those injuries stacked up, I don't know that Colorado has that depth. But I was on them against Nebraska last week as well. Despite I was getting scared that everybody was on the Buffs, but I was just like, no, I just feel like they're better than Nebraska, and so they've been very good to me. But at the same time, Colorado State resides in that state. I went to Mountain West Media Days, I should say, in Las Vegas this year. And I got a chance to talk to Jay Norvell and some of the other Colorado State Rams, and they are so sick of hearing about Deion and them now. I kind of thought they would play Washington State better.
I did too. We actually thought Colorado State was a good play that weekend.
Yeah, I said the same thing on my show, and I thought I was very impressed with Cam Ward and what Washington State's doing, to the point where I took them last week against Wisconsin. So really impressed there. But that offense last year, they were the most sacked team in the nation. Clay Millen was son of Hugh Millen, if you remember him on the New England Patriots back in the day. They're benching him. He only put up 3 points against Washington State, and they're going to a redshirt freshman. His name is Braden Fowler Nikolai, I believe, or Nicolosi. Nicolosi, yeah. He did score 21 points against Wazoo, and I feel like, maybe they found something there. I think, though, the motivational side is completely on Colorado State's. They've yet to score in the 20s, I believe, under Jay Norvell. I think it happens here because Colorado's defense still. If you watch that Nebraska game, I thought Nebraska shot themselves in the foot a little bit with Jeff Sims fumbling the ball. They also missed a field goal, and they still got 14. With all that going wrong, I thought there was a lot of opportunity for Nebraska to score more points, and they weren't able to. I think Colorado's going to get theirs. They're going to score in the 40s, if I had to guess. And you're asking yourself, can Colorado State have their first game in the 20s in the Norvell era? I think they can. Especially, I think, one of the things is they run similar offenses. They got Hal Mummy's son, Matt Mumme, running the somewhat co-offensive coordinator spot in Fort Collins. Obviously, Hal Mumme created the air raid, and then you got Sean Lewis doing the veer and shoot. So you got some similarities. They both pass the ball out, so it's kind of skill on skill. I love the over in this game. I love the over just because I feel like there's no way Colorado's not scoring in the 40s. You look back, even the Nebraska game, I felt like Nebraska had a great game plan for the first half, and I'm actually bullish a little bit on Nebraska's defense. I don't think Colorado State has that level of defense, so I think Colorado's getting in the 40s. The question is, can Colorado State? I think they get in the 20s for the first time, maybe even more. So give me the over on the Colorado State game.
I like it. You look at First off, Colorado's offense is rolling, throwing the ball exceptionally well, and we saw what Cam Ward did to Colorado State in that first game. As much as we were rooting for Colorado State, it was pretty ugly early in the game. Washington State threw for 466 yards in that game. Shedeur Sanders has been a machine. They've been struggling to stop the run, in particular at Colorado. 242 rushing yards a game allowed, over 6 yards a carry allowed. And Nebraska, that final was 36-14. Nebraska probably could have put some more points on the board if Jess Sims wasn't so turnover prone. But I also like that the new quarterback for Colorado State, Fowler Nicolosi, we haven't seen it yet, but he can run a little bit. He's a little athletic. Got a little bit of playing time last year, only 37 pass attempts, though, so we haven't seen what he can really do. So, but I do like that you don't have a whole lot of tape on him. So you're going to have that advantage as well, which is another advantage that I think that teams like Colorado and Texas State had coming into the season. Is no one had any tape, no one had any idea what to do with them.
Yeah.
How do you scout those teams? And it will play into an advantage for Colorado State. We are leaning with Colorado State in this game. We liked Colorado last week. We didn't end up using it as a play, but our lean and power sweep was on Colorado last week. We ended up not using it, but this week we look at the situation for Colorado. They're off 2 big games. They got 2 big games coming up with Oregon and USC in the next 2 weeks. So it could be a flat spot defensively for them, which would allow Colorado State to score some points and stay in the game. And this is the first time we're going to see a Coach Prime team come in as a big favorite. They've been the underdog. Even last week, they weren't the underdog in the end, but up till a week ago, no one thought they were going to win that game. So they were a 9-point dog before the week started and before they upset TCU. That line flipped quickly. So they still had the underdog mentality. Not going to have an underdog mentality in this game. They're a pretty heavy favorite. So, but that's a great call. Definitely one we're going to look at the end of the week when we release our final plays.
I also like the fact. Sorry. I also like the fact that altitude. They're used to the altitude. Colorado State is. So you got that angle going for you too, and then the fact College Game Day and Fox going to be there. I think you're going to get Colorado State's best punch.
Absolutely. Now you mentioned you were on Colorado week 1, and I know that you have been very good picking underdogs, picking some teams that could potentially win outright. Is there an underdog you've identified this week that you think is a live dog that could potentially win outright?
I think, I'm going to take you to the first ever Big 12 game in Houston, Texas, with the Houston Cougars. No, I shouldn't say Houston, Texas, but with the Houston Cougars, with Dana Holgorsen. Look, I was on Rice to beat them on the money line last week. I saw
that. I actually used it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. The Owls, I think the Owls are going to be a bowl team this year. Everyone thinks that's a really bad loss. And I know, Holgersen's not doing them any favors with the alumni, with Houston losing that game, with it being like kind of Rice is located in the city of Houston as well. So I'm sure they're not liking that. And, maybe they get rid of him this year. But I do think Rice is going to end up a bowl team. I think they're better than people think. You watch that Texas game, I thought they played Texas pretty tough. I know maybe Sark kept it vanilla. Who knows? But keep an eye out on the Owls over there. But I think Houston, is a team that is probably better than what people think. When they got Donovan Smith, they got Mathis, the running back from Dub V. They got a healthy Joseph Manjack, the old USC transfer at the wideout spot. I just think they're a little bit better of a team. Now, they were down 28-0 to Rice. They bounced back, scored 28 unanswered, and then lose in overtime. You can see they're a strange team. But on the other side, TCU, I'm just not really buying into this year's TCU team. They lost too much. Garrett Riley, their offensive coordinator, heads out to Clemson. They bring in Kendall Briles. I do think, that's a decent job replacing someone with a good offensive mind. But at the same time, there's something, you just lost too many pieces. And to me, the Colorado game, I don't even know that it was all Colorado. I think some of that was TCU just making, it's a lot of new faces, just didn't mesh well together, and I thought Deion Sanders actually outcoached Sonny Dykes in that game. And I'm just not sold on this TCU roster. So when I think about them going down to Houston, taking on Dana Holgorsen in the opener I remember in August I had some folks on my show that host the Houston Cougar podcast, and their tickets have sold out. This is the most ticket sales they've had ever at the University of Houston. And they were saying, "Oh, that Big 12 opener! We're so glad to be a part of the Power Five now." So I do think they're going to have a legit home field advantage in this game and a chance to beat the team that played in the national championship last year. And I honestly just trust right now. I think TCU is the better team based off of what we've seen in the first 2 weeks. I think I think Houston's just the better team, not TCU. So I do think, you're going to get kind of contrasted styles. Holgerson doing, obviously the Leach air raid, and then you got Briles. Obviously, Leach and Briles had a history. They were on the same Texas Tech staff, so expect a lot of scoring. But I do think the Houston Cougars get it done as a live dog.
All right, and I'll tell you what, that you've been money on some of your underdog plays. I've been following you the last couple of years. You do really well with that. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Colby, tell everyone where to find you on Twitter and on your podcast.
I host the College Football Experience. I also host the FCS College Football Experience. So we got to have you on either of those, Chris.
Anytime you want me on, I will be happy to join.
Let's make that happen. And you can find me on Twitter or the College Football Experience on Twitter at TCE on SGPN. I'm on Twitter at the Colby D. And I appreciate you having me on the show. And I always love the work you do, man.
Hey, thank you again for joining, and I'm going to bring Jim and Robbie here in a moment. Good luck for the rest of the football season. I hope to talk to you soon.
Yeah, anytime, brother. Take care.
And now for everyone's favorite part of the show, I'm going to bring in our two North Coast handicappers, my best friends in the entire world, Jim Seaman and Robbie DePola. Guys, I just want to make sure we understand that there's no pecking order. I said Jim's name first. I don't want Robbie to think that I like Jim better. You guys are equal in my book. I appreciate both of you the same. So thank you for being here.
I'm glad you clarified that, because Jim always likes to play the disrespect card. So he's kind of can't really do that this week. So I'm happy you did that in that regard.
Jim is the Deion Sanders of this office. He loves to play that disrespect card.
Wow.
That's all I
see how it is. Ganging up on me.
I think that's a pretty good compliment. That like one of the hottest coaches in college football, a Hall of Fame football player. I just compared you to him. I don't think you could ever run his 40 time, but you definitely.
No, I'm just saying that. Oh wow, well I'm playing the hurt guy, and well,
yeah. See, already played a disrespect card about about me disrespecting you. So,
he's sticking to the bit.
Yeah. All right. Last week,
sell the premise.
Robbie led the podcast with a 2-1 record. Great job last week, Robbie.
Nice job, Robbie.
Thank you.
Yeah, had winners on Oklahoma State and Georgia Southern, both covered fairly easily. Me and Jim both went 1-2. I had a winner on the Bama Texas over, missed by a half point on Jacksonville State, and Mississippi State can't hold a lead. Jim, Notre Dame was a great call last week. We ended up using that as our top late phone play, so thank you for that. Arkansas just had a flat game. I don't know what happened there. And to be fair, Jim did not know Rocket Sanders wasn't playing that game. That is partly my fault because I was not up to date on the SEC like I normally am. And USC Stanford was a 53 points in the first half, Jim, and that game doesn't go. Yeah, that was brutal. So
that's brutal when they score 53 points and you're like, oh, this looks like a fairly easy. It just needs 17 in the second. Just needs 17. Just okay. Well, we got 14. How about no?
No,
but it happens.
It does, but just to emphasize, there's a couple near misses on the podcast last week. So very close to having that breakthrough day I'd like to see us have where we combine for like a 7-2 or an 8-1 day. I think that's coming. So hopefully this is the week. Robbie, since you had the best record, we're going to lead off with you. What's your first play?
Yeah, going to go to a matchup here with a pretty significant favorite. I've tried to steer clear of those to begin the season, but as we've talked about, not a ton of attractive matchups when it comes to spreads this week.
Let's be honest. This slate is poop. It's
It's
due.
it's pretty bad.
Yeah, there's a lot of big lines.
And so I tried to look, but based off of what we use in Power Sweep, and this was one that still I did like. So let me just make sure I didn't just pick a game out of a hat. I do like this game. It's Oklahoma is minus 27.5. And while technically Oklahoma is listed as the visitor here, they are playing Tulsa, which is just a couple hours down the road. And I would expect the Sooners probably to have the crowd edge because let's be honest, with the shape Tulsa football's in currently, I can't imagine there being a ton of Tulsa fans. This is probably just a chance for those Sooner fans who may not live close to Norman. Maybe they live a little closer to Tulsa to go and check their team out. Another reason why that's important to note is a lot of times in these games where there's a big line and a team gets a big lead, coaches like to put their walk-ons in, play all 110 guys. Obviously, that's not going to be the case here. Oklahoma's still going to have to treat this like a road game. They're going to have limited depth, so you're going to have their better players playing longer. And in Oklahoma's case, even their backup is a 5-star quarterback, so he's got a ton of talent, and they got 4- and 5-star players all throughout the 2 deep. So not too much of a drop off, even when those backups do come in the game. Last week, Tulsa was at Washington, and I believe that line closed at about 33, and it was a push because they lost 43-10. Now this line's 27.5. And like I mentioned, it is technically a road game, but Oklahoma's not going to feel the effects of this game being a road game. And so the fact it's almost a touchdown less, it kind of is attractive to me if you're betting that number. For example, Tulsa did give up, I believe it was 454 yards passing to Washington. They do come in with our number 115 pass defense. And Oklahoma, as we saw 2 weeks ago against an inferior team in Arkansas State, they threw for 422, put up 73 points. Face a little better SMU team, only put up 28, but Tulsa's nowhere near the caliber of team SMU is. With their first-year head coach, only 9 total starters back. It's definitely a rebuilding year for them. Sooners quarterback Dylan Gabriel's hitting nearly 78%. Hasn't thrown a pick yet this year. 6 touchdown passes. So yeah, I see the Sooners in this de facto home game running up the score. I don't think it'll get as bad as 73-0, but I mean I could definitely see like a 55-14 type game, and I think the Sooners can cover this large spread, almost a 4 touchdown spread. If you're looking to bet it before it goes to 28 or buy that half point down, because that is a pretty big number, and all these points count when you're betting a big spread because the margin for error is rather slim when you're betting a near 28 point line. So, but I like the Sooners minus 28 here, or 27.5 here.
Yeah, Oklahoma, that opener, they showed what they can do when they're hitting on all cylinders. And while we don't like the big lines, sometimes you gotta lay them in weeks like this where a lot of the games you're laying big lines. And frankly, sometimes hitting those big lines can be a little fun. Little nose candy.
What?
Come on, Jim.
All righty.
All right. Jim, we're going to go with you next. Me and you tied 1 and 2 last week. What is your I think you're going the opposite way, right? You're going to go with the big dog.
I'm going to go with the big dog here. And
I'm the big dog of the office.
I'm going to go with Western Kentucky plus 29 versus Ohio State. Ohio State is 0-2 ATS this year. They have a new quarterback, and they're a little bit sluggish, and they've dropped a little bit in the rankings. And normally you would think, okay, well, they're going to come out, maybe try to run up the score a little bit, keep that up. But next week they have Notre Dame on deck. And it doesn't really matter what they win by here. If they beat a should be 4-0, Notre Dame ranked in the top 10. They're going to go right back up into that the top of the order, and that's the win that they need. This game is basically as long as they win it. They only won by 28 points over Youngstown State last week. They just kind of went through the motions kind of in the second half. And Western Kentucky is, how can I put it? They can almost be scary because they can put up some points. I mean, they put up 41 points versus South Florida. They did play a FCS school last week, but they put up 52. But even against the FCS school, 52 points is nothing to sneeze at. I'm looking at here, even if they get a couple of touchdowns, Ohio State's defense has shown some cracks. They're still good. They're still a top 10 team, but I think Western Kentucky can score some here. And when you're getting 29 points, you don't have to score that much. And I don't think Ohio State's going, if they have a big lead in the second half, they're going to pull some people. They're not going to want anybody hurt because they've got that top 10 showdown versus Notre Dame on deck. And so a lot of this is situation, but this is the toughest opponent they're playing this year. And they haven't, covered this amount this year. So I'll take the 29 points in Western Kentucky.
Yeah, I'm going to have some thoughts on the total when we come around to it. But, yeah, Western Kentucky's a live dog, and they definitely can score. And I'll expand on my thoughts of why I think Western Kentucky will score some points in a little while. But first, I'm going to get into one of my sides. I've got Louisiana Tech -4.5. I'm going to ride the Hank Bachmeier train here. The week one they played FIU. Outgained them 447 to 182, allowed just 8 first downs and 4 passing yards in that game. And they win by 5 because they settled for 6 field goal attempts. Only made 4 of those field goals, had to come from behind and win. A week later, they lose to SMU by 24. SMU's a pretty good football team. Then they beat Northwestern State, a not great FCS team, by 30 last week. But they're playing North Texas, who has a first-year head coach in Eric Morris. A little bit of a quarterback quandary, switching back and forth between Chandler Rogers, the ULM transfer, and Stone Earl, a kid who played for Abilene Christian a few years ago and didn't see hardly any action last year. They've got some potent running backs, but the thing that really stuck out to me in this game, week one, they're playing Cal close before the half. They're down 27-21. They give up a late touchdown, but they ended up giving up 58 points and 669 yards to Cal in that game. 357 rush, 312 pass, so it was balanced. And then you think, okay, maybe just got away from them. The next week they play that same FIU team that Louisiana Tech should have probably crushed, and North Texas gets beat 46-39. Allowed 514 yards to FIU. 223 rushing yards, 291 passing yards after Louisiana Tech had held FIU to, I believe I said 8 passing yards. No, 4. I'm sorry, 4. 5 of 14 passing for 4 yards. So, based on how Louisiana Tech and North Texas both played FIU, there's an obvious edge to Louisiana Tech. They're at home, where they've covered 7 of the 8 games that Sonny Cumbie has coached at home for Louisiana Tech. Among their wins last year at home, they beat Middle Tennessee by 16, UTEP by 10. They also played UAB pretty tough at the end of the season, only losing by 10, and barely outgained in that game. They just seem to be a better team at home. They really struggle on the road, though. Last year, they were -22 points per game, -128 yards per game on the road. At home, they were much better, plus 10 points per game at home, -6 yards per game at home. But this is a more experienced team with Louisiana Tech. Second-year head coach, determined to get to a bowl game. This is a key game for them to get there. They were formerly conference and division foes with North Texas. The last time they played here, Louisiana Tech won 24-17. As a matter of fact, they had won the previous 4 meetings before last year, which again was one of those road games where Louisiana Tech really struggled. I think North Texas is in that transition with a new head coach where they haven't found an identity. They're really struggling defensively. 592 yards a game allowed, over 300 passing yards a game allowed, almost 300 rushing yards per game allowed. It seems like whatever they're trying to do on defense, it is just not working. They can move the ball a little bit, but I actually think Louisiana Tech's defense is not terrible. And there's a big edge, I think, as far as the overall defensive skill. Coaching, I think, is an edge for Louisiana Tech. They're at home. They're only laying 4.5. I think it's cheap. I think the Bulldogs get it done by over a touchdown, probably closer to 2 scores. Louisiana Tech minus 4.5 is my first play. And that does it for round 1. Let's go to round 2. Back to Robbie. What do you got for us in your second play?
Yeah, going to go with I know we're getting in a little bit more. There are a few more conference games coming up here. Going to do another non-conference game here. Going to go Group of 5 versus Power 5 here. Fresno State is actually a 3-point favorite currently at Arizona State. Fresno is off to a 2-0 start this year. As you recall, they took down Purdue on the road in week 1, beat them 39-35, scored a late touchdown there to get the win. Last week was a bit of a flat spot. It was a sandwich game versus an FCS team in Eastern Washington. Took them to 2 overtimes until they only won 34-31. But again, that game was in the middle of road games at Power 5 teams. So admittedly, probably was a little bit of a flat spot for Fresno there, especially coming off such a big win. But they were able to still pull out the win last week, despite it not being their best performance. Fresno State did have Jake Haener, who's now currently on the Saints roster in the NFL. So they lost a pretty good quarterback. They did bring in UCF transfer Mikey Keene. So far through 2 games, he's hitting upwards of 65%, has a 6-2 ratio. Defense has been pretty solid, giving up 363 to Purdue, 366 to Eastern Washington. Pretty solid team there under a veteran head coach in Jeff Tedford, as to where Arizona State barely got past Southern Utah 2 weeks ago. That was a bit of a weird game. There was a weather delay, but they only beat Southern Utah, who was a lower level FCS team, not toward the top of the conference they are in. And they did lead Oklahoma State at home 15-10 last week, but only gained 105 yards in the second half and were shut out in a 27-15 loss. Arizona State is playing a true freshman quarterback to begin the year, and he's only hitting 57%. They're only averaging 123 rush yards per game to begin the season, and they're dealing with some injuries to their offensive line as well. Fresno in the past under Tedford has done well against Pac-12 teams. They are on a 6-2 ATS run. And they do have a win against a Pac-12 team each of the last 2 seasons. And I just think when you look at it, Arizona State with a first-year head coach kind of trying to figure out who exactly they are. And you got a veteran head coach in Jeff Tedford coming in with a quarterback who's new to the system but playing well. Team is confident after going on the road 2 weeks ago and beating Purdue. And I just think that this game to me seems like Fresno is the better team. They are the favorite. I would expect them to win this. I don't expect them to win in a blowout. I would expect another close game, but I think they can win this game by 7 to 10 points. So I'll take Fresno -3 at Arizona State.
All right. Yeah, Arizona State had the sandstorm in the first week. Fresno, yeah, they really looked good that first week and disappointed us when they beat Purdue. But good call on that one, Robbie. All right, Jim, you are up next.
I am up next, and I just noticed that in some ways I'm going against another Big Ten team. I'm going to take Washington -16 over Michigan State. As you know, a lot of distractions there at Michigan State. And in some ways of thinking about it this year, the transfer portal has affected college football dramatically. And now you're going to have a bunch of these guys who I don't think their head coach is coming back. I don't see how he could with what's been out there. And how many of those guys are going to think about transferring, because they can still redshirt this year, save a year, go somewhere else. And I think that's a lot of distraction. You have Washington coming in. They're a top 10 team already. This is going to be a conference game next year with, Washington joining the Big Ten. Washington in the games themselves so far this year has been impressive. They beat Boise State 56-19, Tulsa 43-10, kind of cruised in those games, put up over a 200-yard edge in both of those games. Michigan State, well, they're also 2-0. They beat Central Michigan, a team that just got by a FCS team, a very good FCS team in New Hampshire, but they only won by 3 last week. So that their win in the opener doesn't seem as impressive. And then now they got by a ranked Richmond team, which is an FCS team again, but this year Richmond is down. So it's not as impressive as the win as you would think. So I think in some ways those 2 wins are less impressive. And I think Washington's are in more ways more impressive. So I think with all the distractions that Michigan State's putting up with right now, Washington's going to want to do style points, kind of make a statement here. They have Cal on deck, but once again, this is going to be a conference game next year. I don't see them concentrating that much. They'll be hosting Cal. So I look for them to kind of put the pedal down here and take advantage of most likely a distracted Michigan State team.
You brought up the Michigan State Central Michigan game. Michigan State was only winning that game 10-7 at halftime. It was 17-7 to start the fourth quarter, and Michigan State pulled away. Also, I can't, Robbie, and you might remember this, and I'd have to look it up. Did Michael Penix get hurt playing Michigan State? I feel like that might be the case. When he was at Indiana, I can't remember who he got hurt when they were playing somebody, obviously. It was a Big Ten game, but I can't remember. Do you remember who he got hurt against?
Yeah, I'm trying to recall that. They played in 21. Let me take a look at the start chart here. So it looks like in 21 he started. Yeah, so that Michigan State game was the first week he did not start. So it looks like he got hurt maybe even prior to the Michigan State game in 21. And then in 20,
you know what? I think it might have been against Maryland.
Yeah, because he played against them in 20, and then he got hurt prior to the game in 21.
Okay. Yeah. All right. That's what happened. He got hurt that week before. All right. So it was just a thought that popped in my head. Like, oh yeah, well Penix, he has some Big Ten experience, so he'll be hungry to play here and get a W. All right. I'm going to go with a big underdog. I like those big lines again. South Carolina plus 27.5. You look at how they played the opener. They gave up the 9 sacks. I like the improvement on the offensive line. They played Furman last week. It is a top 5 FCS team. And Furman scrapped with them for a little while. South Carolina really ended up putting it on them in the end, 47-21. I think they really built some confidence. Like I said, they went from 9 sacks allowed to 1. Spencer Rattler hasn't had a single turnover yet this year. The one concern is they're struggling to run the ball, but man, is Rattler throwing the ball. He's completing 80% of his pass, 83% to be exact. 698 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. They've got a couple wide receivers that are really standing out. Xavier Legette, 296 yards in just 2 games, has really been an electric downfield threat. And that's with their top guy, Antoine Juice Wells, has been banged up. And I think that he'll be probably a lot healthier for this game because they didn't really use him last week. So you're getting a team that is building a little bit of confidence. And remember last year at the end of the year, South Carolina spoiled Tennessee's potential national title playoff season, beat them at home, then went to Clemson and beat Clemson on the road, and then gave Notre Dame a good game in a bowl game. They lost by 7. Georgia just doesn't look like they have the same level of explosiveness without Stetson Bennett. And we might see that Stetson Bennett meant a lot more to this team than we realized. Also, Georgia's been pretty banged up. 2 of their top 3 running backs have yet to play. One of them's out for the year. The other one has dealt with a hamstring injury since the spring, so they might be down to just basically one of their top running backs in Kendall Milton. Their top receiver last year was Ladd McConkey. He's yet to play. He's dealing with a back injury. Of course, they have tight end Brock Bowers, but it's a lot easier to defend him when he's the only real big threat that they've got that's proven. Carson Beck, the new starting quarterback, he's been accurate, but he's not completing, balls downfield as much. He did throw for a lot of yards against UT Martin last week. Slow start against UT Martin in week 1, slow start last week against Ball State. They only led 7-0 last week after 1 quarter. They eventually pulled away, but that's against Ball State. They're not going to have that huge talent edge that they had the last 2 weeks. And 27.5 feels like a lot to me, especially if Spencer Rattler isn't turning the ball over, which he seems to not be doing. He seems to look like the Spencer Rattler that we all heard was a potential top draft pick a few years ago when he had a Heisman hopeful before the season started with Oklahoma. The other thing is South Carolina actually is the last team to beat Georgia on their home field. That was a few years ago. That's back in 2019. That was the 3-interception game where South Carolina won in overtime 20-17. I'm not saying that'll happen here, but it's going to be a lot closer than we saw last year with 48-7, the year before 40-13. I don't think we see that kind of game. I think that Shane Beamer has his boys ready to play. I think they're competitive. I think that they keep this game close for a half because Georgia's already shown they're prone to slow starts. And I think that if you have a slow start against South Carolina, it's going to be real tough to cover 4 touchdowns. Would like to get that extra half point, but right now 27.5, I'll take it. I like the Gamecocks getting the points here. All right. We're going to go to our totals now, and we'll start with Robbie. We got our totals game of the month, by the way. Make sure all of our listeners know that. So before we get into this, 4.5-star totals game of the month, just $69 if you're a 23 or I'm sorry, if you're a 24 sub, $89 if you're a 23 sub. So make sure you get on board for that college totals 4.5-star game of the month. And also we have a lot of other late phone packages. Check out the prices on the back of Power Sweep. And also, we will be giving out a code here in a few minutes. All right, Robbie, what do you got for your first total?
Yeah, scanning over the lines, looking. I know that a lot of times in the past, especially last year, we did use quite a few totals in the Sun Belt, and a lot of those times it was under, because there were quite a few teams last year that had pretty good defenses in the Sun Belt. This is not one of those cases. I'm actually going to go with an over. It's going to be James Madison and Troy over 47.5. Troy was a team we used quite a few times. Well, last season when it came to unders, their defense was one of the best in college football last year. In Sun Belt play last year, they gave up only 290 yards per game, 16 points per game. Held their Sun Belt foes to 90 yards per game, below their average for the season. This year, defense looks pretty solid. Only returned 6 starters, so they had to incorporate some new starters into that unit. Last week against Kansas State, they did give up 42 points, 397 yards. They did give up 30 points to Stephen F. Austin in the opener, despite only allowing 240 yards. They were -3 turnovers in that game. And James Madison, in their brief stint so far in the FBS and in the Sun Belt, 8 of their 13 games have gone over the total. Just looking at some of their scores from last year, against App State, it was 32-28. Against Arkansas State, it was 42-20. You had a game against Georgia Southern, 45-38, 42-40 against Georgia State. even this year, their one FBS game, they just didn't upset Virginia. They were the favorite, but they beat Virginia 36-35, gave up 377 passing yards in that game. And I know Troy does have a veteran quarterback in Gunnar Watson. He threw for 216 last week. So they're going to look to get their pass game going here. I think they can. James Madison, on the other hand, turned to quarterback. Jordan McLeod, the former South Florida and Arizona quarterback, he came in last week, got the start. Really looked like he got the offense moving there. They put up 36 points, almost 400 yards. And I just think 47.5 to me seems a bit low. Weather seems okay right now. This is a game in Troy, in Alabama. And I just think with it being 47.5, I mean, I think James Madison and Troy can each get to 24, 27 points on their own. I mean, I'm thinking like a 31-28 type game. I think it's going to be a close game. These two teams actually would have played for the Sun Belt title had James Madison been able to play in the game last year. So I think it's going to be a hotly contested game. I think both offenses can put up points. Both defenses don't seem to be as strong as they were last year. And I think with it being under 50 points at 48.5 is pretty cheap. So I'll take James Madison Troy over 47.5.
Okay, Jim. Well, before I get to that, I do want to mention I watched that JMU Virginia game, and they gave a lot of yards and points to a true freshman quarterback making his first career start. So, yeah, I'm with you, Robbie. I think that could be a high-scoring game. Jim, what do you have for your first total? For your only total.
I was going to say my first and only total, but okay. I'm going to go with Syracuse and Purdue over 57.5. I think this is a little bit low there. Purdue in their games are averaging 58 points per game. Well, Syracuse is averaging 61. Now, Syracuse, once again, they played Colgate, Western Michigan, but they're averaging 57 points per game on their own. Don't expect them to get it here against Purdue, and they will be outside the dome, and I took that into effect. But even if you look at it last week in Purdue's game against Virginia Tech, there's a weather delay in that game, and I think that kind of threw it off a little because it's always hard to, stop, start. And so I think that game would have gone a little bit higher, a little bit more scoring. Purdue's going to be able to put up some points here, and it's not just going to be Syracuse having to, carry the ball in the over. Power Plays is actually calling for 62 points, 800 yards of offense. And I agree with that. I think these are two teams that are going to put up some points. I think 57.5 is relatively low for this game. And it's not like Purdue's defense. I mean, they gave up 39 points to Fresno State, 17 and, a rain log game with Virginia Tech. But Virginia Tech, I don't think it's necessarily who we thought they were going to be this year. So I think Syracuse is going to be able to put up points. I think Purdue is going to be able to answer some. And I think this should be a nice high-scoring game.
I'm with you. Syracuse always a high-powered offense. Losing Sean Tucker, I think, is addition by subtraction. And, Garrett Schrader, I think, is veteran quarterback. And as long as he stays healthy, that offense will score some points. All right. And I alluded to it earlier. My total is on the Ohio State-Western Kentucky game. Jim already gave out his pick on the side with Western Kentucky plus 29. I'm going with the over here. And there's a couple things that stand out to me. So far, Ohio State has played 2 games. The first game they played against was Indiana. In that game, there was a total. Ohio State ran a total of 67 plays. Indiana ran 54. They came out actually tried a triple option offense and trying to throw Ohio State off, and they knew they couldn't match athlete for athlete, so they tried to burn a lot of clock, and it worked in keeping them in the game. That they didn't score much, but they did keep them within 3 scores, closer than people expected it to be. The next week they play Youngstown State. Youngstown State did a little bit of the same thing, ran the ball 33 times, never really got into the game naturally. They did score early. It was 7-7. So, credit to Youngstown State for getting an early touchdown and being tied with Ohio State after a quarter. But Ohio State, again, they ran 60 plays. They didn't get a lot of opportunity to get the offense going. Now comes Western Kentucky into town, and Western Kentucky runs a fast-paced offense. It's Tyson Helton, a little bit of air raid principle. What we've seen from Western Kentucky, 52 and 41 points in the first two games. You're seeing, upwards of 70 plays in the opener against South Florida. Last week, not as many plays. It was a blowout. They started, burning that clock in the fourth quarter a little bit. But the other thing, look at the last three games that Western Kentucky has played against Big Ten teams. Scored 30 points against Indiana, scored 31 points against Indiana the year before that, and scored 31 points at Michigan State in 21. Austin Reed, talented quarterback, threw 40 touchdown passes last year, 4,700 passing yards. His top receiving threat last year, Malachi Corley, 1,200, nearly 1,300 passing yards and 11 touchdowns. He came back. He missed last week, but he was healthy. They didn't have to play him, so they didn't. But he got hurt early in the game against South Florida. He'd already had 4 catches for 55 yards. They said he could have played last week, but they decided to sit him out instead, electing to use the younger guys against an overmatched Houston Christian team. So a lot of offense on Western Kentucky's side. They're going to score some points, and they're going to move faster, which is going to give Ohio State more opportunities to get their offense going. They don't have anybody to cover Marvin Harrison. The one question for Western Kentucky coming into the season was on defense, where they lose 7 starters. This was a defense that allowed 384 yards a game last year and was a fairly veteran unit. Now they're really young, and I expect them to struggle. They gave up 540 yards to South Florida in the opener. That was a team with a first-year head coach playing their first game with a first-year starting quarterback. South Florida ran for 374 yards on them in that game. Expect Ohio State to run and throw for a lot of yards in this game. TreVeyon Henderson could have a big game. Kyle McCord now is the starter, so there's no question about it, which means he doesn't have to look over his shoulder. He can go out, play free, and try to light up the scoreboard. I think they will do that. I think Ohio State will get into the 40s, maybe even the low 50s. I think Western Kentucky will get into the 20s. I think you could see them put up 24 points in Columbus. So I'm going to take the over 64, Ohio State versus Western Kentucky. I think that's a solid opportunity for Ohio State to get the offense moving after topping out at just 35 points as their high so far this year, when we know they're a lot better and a lot more capable than that. All right, so thank you, Jim and Robbie, for giving your picks for this week. Jim, do you have any closing thoughts?
Thanks to the listeners for sticking around, and have a good week.
Robbie, anything you want to say to the listeners before we let you go?
No, just thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you guys listening, and let's hit some bets this week.
All right. Make sure you check out the Back of Power Suite for your prices for this weekend's late phone packages. I already mentioned we do have the college totals 4.5-star game of the month. You want to get a discount on that game of the month in honor of the job that Deion Sanders is doing at Colorado. Code is going to be Prime Time. Prime Time is the code for this week. Gets you $10 off any late phone package if you call in 1-800-654-3448. You can also use it online if you get the Power Sweep. If you want to either subscribe to Power Sweep or you want to add on for next year, the code Primetime will get you $10 off any of those. You would have to call in to get the late phone packages, 1-800-654-3448, code Primetime. Want to thank Colby Dant again for joining us on the podcast today from the College Football Experience. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at the Colby D, and also follow the College Football Experience at TCE on SGPN. Thank you very much for listening, and we look forward to having you back next week.
Take care.